Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley, an IFS-informed certified trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from survivors all over the world as they share their impactful story of thriving in their post-traumatic growth. We explore resources, tools, and coping skills to support the trauma survivor community. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley. I am an IFS-informed trauma recovery and lifestyle design coach. I have with us today Acamea Deadwiler. Acamea, thank you so much for joining us. She is a Pushcart Prize nominated memoirist and essayist who received praise from Publishers Weekly, and she has authored the memoir, Daddy's Little Stranger. Her work has appeared in Bellevue Literary Review, North American Review, and Beyond Words Literary Magazine, among other publications. She's also a TEDx speaker. Currently residing in Nevada, Acamea is an Indiana native. She holds a master's degree and is a fellow at the MFA program at Randolph College. Acamea, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great. Let's just dive into a little bit of your story. I know you kind of called your path like kind of a lonesome childhood. I'm very interested to just kind of hear how you've come from there to where you are now.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. What's interesting about it is that I was not an only child. I had a younger brother. So this idea of loneliness and feeling alone it's kind of like a testament to the fact how they say you can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. So it's one of those things. It's not like, I was just at home by myself all the time and things like that. I wasn't, but I wasn't in an environment that was emotionally nurturing or healthy. And I think those things can make you feel alone when you're not being hugged and you're not being told I love you and no one's talking to you about anything. It makes you feel very alone, even if I have my little brother right here playing next to me. And then just our different, he had his father and I didn't, and just all of those different variables make you feel kind of discarded, which I think by nature makes you feel more alone.
Very, very, very true. So what was that like for you as you started to realize this loneliness? I imagine there was just knowing what I know from trauma and the aloneness or feeling rejected or discarded, like you said, that there's this kind of ache inside. When did you really first start noticing that something didn't quite feel right to how things were for you?
I noticed it probably when I was about 8 years old, which is where my book Daddy's Little Stranger begins. And I'm waiting in front of the window so I thought my brother's father was my father up until about 5 years old when he and my mother divorced. And so when they divorced and we moved, she had to tell me like, hey, that's not your father. This other man is your father and he wants to meet you. And so I was devastated, of course, and to quickly mask that devastation, I got this attitude, like, oh, I want to meet my daddy. I want to meet my father. And I was excited to meet him, and I did. And then there was this time where I would go months without seeing or hearing from him after the first and second time I saw him. So I was waiting for him in front of the window when I was 8 years old because he was supposed to take me to get a backpack for school the next day. And I waited literally all day. I put on like my best outfit and my mom did my hair. And I sat in front of the window, literally waiting for him all day. So excited. Like my daddy is coming to get me. We're going shopping and he never shows up. And I think that was when I first started to really feel this sense of aloneness because I was sitting in front of that window waiting alone. I was a kid. I was sitting there waiting alone. No one really said anything to me for hours, except for every now and then my mom would be like, why don't you go play? Why don't you go watch TV and wait for him? Why wait in front of the window? Or my brother would say, hey, come play. Why are you just sitting in front of the window? Every now and then somebody might say something like that. But for the most part, it was just me staring out of this window for literally hours until finally, realizing that he wasn't coming. And I think that was when I first got this sense of what I was missing and this sense of being discarded, and just this aloneness, like, wow, I've just this sense that you're just kind of dangling out here in space and no one really notices you or cares about you, to be honest.
Wow. That is so tough because they weren't even explaining what was going on and no one was there to emotionally support you. And that is like a secondary trauma from the original trauma of him just not showing up. I'm curious too with your you said your mom had got divorced, so your little brother's father was not actually your bio father. Did he just kind of stop being a dad to you also? So after the divorce, he would only come and spend time with your brother?
Actually, to his credit, he didn't. The thing was, when they were married, we lived in San Diego. He was in the Navy. So
Ah,
when they divorced, we moved back to Gary, Indiana, which is where my family is from. So we were so far away from him that neither of us saw him. But
wow.
he would come, he was also from Gary, that's where they met. He would come home for like holidays and when he got leave from the military and things like that. And when he did, he would, come and get both of us. He never treated me any differently or left me out or anything like that. I think there was just something inside of me, like knowing like this isn't my father and I want my father to care about me. That's kind of what got in the way of his valiant attempts, honestly, to remain in my life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Is that it's so difficult when you know that there's a truth now, right? And it sounds like they covered it up because they cared. They just thought maybe they never really have to tell you because they knew your father probably wouldn't be around. But at the end of the day, not really knowing who you are is really devastating. That adds to that
Yeah,
loneliness and that
yeah.
abandonment kind of feeling. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, at what point did you start finding some support for these lonely kind of, I mean, you're talking about like bitterness and resentment that was starting to kind of build up. When did it come to a point where you were like, I got to deal with some of this?
It honestly wasn't until I was adult, very recently, like maybe in the past, I would say 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Because, like we said, when I was a kid, no one talked to me about these things. No one ever explained, hey, it's not your fault that your dad didn't come. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or he doesn't love you. So, in my childhood mind, I'm telling myself all these things. He doesn't want me, and there's something wrong with me, and
Yeah.
no one's refuting that. So it wasn't until I got older and old enough to start to think critically about my own situations and I read a lot of self-help books and um just reading and learning and understanding myself and saying, how we kind of say, oh, that's just how I am. There is a reason we are the way that we are. And so it took me getting older and emotionally mature enough to even look at that and say, why do I do this? Why am I this way? Why do I feel this way? And being honest with myself about that, where I really was able to start unraveling it. But it was very recently, like I said, no more than like the previous 10 years.
Wow. Yeah, same. Let's
Mm,
just sit in that for a minute. That sometimes you have to get to this point where you're like, wait, I'm getting curious about this now. I think the curiosity really leads to the empowerment because if you're truly curious, you're going to hunt for the answer no matter how difficult it is. Where if
absolutely.
it's just like, oh, you heard on a movie, oh, why? Or a therapist asks you why, and you're not really interested in digging because the digging is painful. That's when the pain's coming to the surface, and then you have to feel it, and that sucks even more. So, yeah, there's a lot of layers there. So, when you talk about like this resentment and bitterness, how was that healing process for you? What kind of led you to this place where you could kind of let that resentment go?
It was several different things. First was, like I said, taking an honest look at myself and how I felt, and not even me necessarily today, because I do feel like I'm pretty okay today and emotionally healthy and stable. More so looking at the child version of me that no one ever paid attention to. It's still in those child versions of us are still inside of us and makes decisions for us on occasion. So I'm looking at this little girl inside of me who makes decisions about relationships and people and how to handle situations, even if I don't realize that's who's making these decisions.
Yeah.
So, aside from, honestly looking at that and really being just truthful with myself about how she felt sitting in front of that window all day and her father not coming and then, never seeing him again. I read a lot, like I said, I read a lot of self-help books. One that was particularly transformative was The Emotionally Absent Mother. It's by a therapist. I can't think of her name right now. Jasmine Lee Corey, I think. And I know it sounds strange because this whole book is about not having my father, but I think to your point, what compounded that was having this mother who wasn't emotionally capable of handling the situation because she had her own things going on. And that's something I learned too as an adult, it wasn't just my mother. She was a woman. She was a person. She was her own person. And I think sometimes we tend to see our parents as just our parents and kind of forget that they had their own lives, their own traumas, their own things they've experienced that have also shaped them.
Yeah.
And so I do believe she did the best she can, but that doesn't change how it affected me. So reading that book was really helpful to first unravel that and understand that. And once I let go of the resentment for whatever she did or did not do to help me through this process, I was able to start helping myself. So those were, I would say, the two biggest things, being able to look at my situation, being comfortable letting go of my story, because I do think sometimes we get addicted to our stories where we want to just keep saying, this happened to me and this is why I am this way. Because to your point, to let it go means to face these other truths and these other hurts that may be more painful. So it just really helped me let go, forgive not only my mother, but my father, and also hold that little girl and tell her all the things that, no one ever told her. But that was really the catalyst for it, was this book I read, honestly, and just the willingness and getting to a place of growth where I could even look at it honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Taking a hard look at that is so important. We talk about when trauma happens, it doesn't necessarily, when a traumatic incident that can create trauma happens, if it is handled with emotional support immediately, it doesn't necessarily get stuck in the mind,
Mm-hmm.
stuck in the body. It doesn't necessarily present as trauma. But
Mm-hmm.
so, to that point of having that mother there, him
Mm-hmm.
being absent, but her being emotionally absent, those are both traumas for a child,
Absolutely.
because you're not being even told what's even happening. And if
Mm-hmm.
someone was there to explain it or to uplift you and to say, hey, I know this really sucks, this is hard, let's be sad together, that would have changed a
Absolutely.
whole world of difference for you. So I appreciate that you can see that other side of it as
Mm-hmm.
well, that there was really two caretakers here, and they both had their absences for their own reasons. There's definitely room for compassion without condoning, but
Mm-hmm.
this idea that they both had a responsibility to you, and they both did
Mm-hmm.
not hit you in the way that you needed to be hit, with this knowledge and
Mm-hmm.
understanding what was happening, what was your truth. And I'm loving that you found your truth
Mm-hmm.
later, because that there will just bring a whole new light of freedom to you. So I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a huge part to overcoming, is saying, I love how you said compassion without condoning. I'm not saying this was okay, but like I said, just understanding my mother went through things and that she was this whole other person outside of being my mother, but that influenced, the way she was able to mother. And so just saying it's done. There's nothing either of us can go back and do to change it. All I can do now is focus on healing myself and overcoming that. And I think part of that process is letting go of that resentment and, calling my mother and, saying I love you, even when it doesn't come natural to me, because we never had that relationship, even when it's uncomfortable and it's awkward, trying to kind of forcing is the wrong word, but doing it consciously, and in the hopes that soon it becomes subconscious and we can develop these new habits, these newer, healthier, more nurturing and loving habits.
Yeah, yeah. Naming that word forcing is really important, because it might feel like a forcing, but it's like your little girl is the one who feels uncomfortable with it. But now you're trying to say, no, it's okay to love our mom. And so
Exactly.
you're jumping in the driver's seat there and saying, we're going to do this, even though you're a little uncomfortable, because you're going to see it's going to be okay. You got to trust me. And so you've
Mm-hmm.
built a relationship with that inner child. And that work is so, so important. And forgiveness, also forgiving yourself and forgiving her is really, really, really important. I love the inner child's work. That's IFS, internal family systems, is my favorite professional and personal modality for myself. And I've seen the most healing with myself and with my clients with IFS. And it's very similar to that, going back to those hurt little children and going, it's okay. We got this now. You got to trust me. I've figured things out now. So you're really remothering and refathering yourself, because there was an absence on both sides for you. So I love
Yeah.
that. Mm,
Absolutely. Thank you.
yeah.
And I love that how you said forgiving yourself too, because I mean, I wasn't like this wild child that was giving people problems or anything like that, but I wasn't, the perfect daughter either, especially once I started to feel the way that I felt. The way I protected myself was to honestly become emotionless. So it's
Mm,
like no one's comforting me, no one's talking to me. I have to just detach and not care in order to survive. So on a rare occasion where she did try and come, I had already built this wall between us and I would shun it. and just be very cold and just not caring about how I said things or how they may have made her feel. So yeah, part of it is forgiving myself as well because I wasn't the perfect daughter in that sense. I don't think any of us can claim to have been perfect.
Yeah, yeah. When you've had an emotional detachment like that, which is obviously a protective mechanism, right? To just shut down, I'm just going to be even keel. Nothing's going to get me super
Mhm.
depressed or super upset. It also means you're not going to have the other side of like super happy, super
Mhm.
excitement. You're not going to feel that true thriving and joy. What was the process like for you to reconnect to your emotional self?
Wow, that's so true. And that's something I told myself that was a big part of me actually even wanting to do this because I was like, okay, by being on this side and being emotionally detached, I'm also missing out on the other side, like the good part and connecting with people and experiencing love and deep, emotional connection. It was tough. It was kind of what I said, similar to making an effort with my mother because it takes consciously acting against your nature. I'm consciously embracing emotionally intimate and emotionally vulnerable situations, whereas before I would just avoid them. So I'll sit here in this uncomfortable situation and have this uncomfortable conversation, or let this person get emotionally close to me, or tell them this thing that makes me feel super vulnerable intentionally because I'm trying to, tear down these walls that I've built over decades. So, I mean, it's tough and it's uncomfortable, but I definitely can already feel that I'm a better, more complete person for having done it and
For sure.
continuing to do it.
And returning to that authenticity of yourself. We are emotional beings. We're emotional spiritual beings. We live in a body, we have a mind, but the emotions that drive us are that's what gives us life, really, to enjoy things and to dislike things and to have preferences, and those that's such an important
Mhm.
part. So I'm so glad that you've done it's very, very hard work to reconnect
Mhm.
emotionally to yourself, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been worth it. I would say I probably felt more loved in the past 5 or 6 years than I felt my entire life. And then I learned something too. It wasn't even just about learning how to receive love. I needed to learn how to give love. Like I've always been, a kind person, nice, those kinds of things, but I could never have called myself loving
Yeah.
and intentionally opening myself up to that. I've had some of my most fulfilling romantic relationships, just being able to connect with people. So I feel like I've grown a lot, and I just feel you feel better, when you feel loved. And I've also learned how gratifying it is to also give love. So those are two ways that I've grown tremendously.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah. Good on you for doing the work. It is worth it. It's just
For
wicked hard. Yeah, for
sure.
sure.
Yeah, right.
I love that.
Exactly.
I love that. So I want to dive into your memoir. It is called Daddy's Little Stranger. So this is narrating, it narrates a lot more of your very difficult, but also beautiful path.
Mm.
Who should be reading this book? Who did you write this book for? Or just for yourself?
I wrote it. This is one that I did write a lot for my child self. And also I think ultimately I wrote it for every little girl who grew into a woman and became her own hero.
Mm,
Like I think there are so many of us out there who just learn to take care of ourselves and look up to ourselves and succeed in life for ourselves because we felt like we were the only ones that were going to save us, which I think in a sense is true. It can be unhealthy to look at someone else as your savior or look to someone else to save you. So I think there is a healthy side of it, but I was radically, independent.
mm,
Um, but yeah, it's dedicated to us. And I think it's for us women, girls who grew into women and learn to become your own hero so that you could live a full life and become the person and the woman that you are proud of.
I love that. I love that. I also want to note that you wrote another book called Single That, Dispelling the 10 Myths of the Single Woman. And you say that being single doesn't mean that you're lonely, that you're broken, that you're bitter, right? In your single times, do you feel like the world was judging you with those adjectives? How are you dispelling that?
I didn't feel like that at first. It was later in life as I started to get older. I think once I crossed 30, it became this thing all of a sudden because it's like that's the age where people are like, okay, now you're getting older when you're going to get married and have kids. And now it's not cute anymore. You're not just having fun anymore. But yeah, it became a thing where this is when I was starting to gain some traction as a writer. And I think one of the most pivotal moments for me is I went to a networking event with an associate. And she introduced me as her single friend, not my writer friend, not my, sports journalist friend, because I was covering the Chicago Bulls for Yahoo at the time. So it's like, I'm all these things, I'm accomplishing all these things, and you've narrowed me down to this particular aspect of my being like, hey, this is my single friend Acamea. And I was just like, what? And then from then, I think once you become aware of something, you start to notice it more. So then I really started to notice all the ways that we define women by relationship status. And particularly if you are single, those definitions aren't usually flattering. So that's what kind of, made me start to think about that and ultimately write a book about it.
Yeah, yeah. You know, what's really interesting is you're doing a lot of healing work, right? You're on this path now, you're doing this healing work, which a lot of it sounds like attachment wounds, a lot of interpersonal connection with people, with humans, right? How you attach them, emotional intimacy, these kinds of things are what you're healing inside of you. And
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that you're broken or bitter and that you can't have a relationship, because we can look all around us and we can see people who are inside of relationships who are trying to do this exact same healing. And
Mhm.
we're looking at people who are inside of relationships who should be doing the work and who are not.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't necessarily point to these aspects of yourself. We can't just judge people alone by what they've got going on. People will say that about divorced couples, or wow, you've been divorced 4 times, you
Mhm.
must not have figured
What's
it out.
wrong
It's
with
like,
you? Right.
I'm sorry, have you figured it out just because you're still in that
Right.
unhappy marriage for 30, 40 years?
Right.
Let's
Right.
all just let ourselves be who we were meant to be. And I have a feeling that there's a lot of that in both of your books. So just like, how
Yeah.
about you just let me be? Because I'm a constantly growing, I'm a constantly evolving human being.
Exactly. And that was my entire point with single, that like I'm not saying that I have it all figured out and that I couldn't growth in some areas wouldn't serve me. And to be honest, when I was single, I never really felt this overwhelming loneliness. But honestly, I think that's a testament to always feeling alone. This was normal to me. This was more natural to me than it would be to the person that grew up in like a nurturing, close, loving family.
Right.
So not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but it's not the defining thing, your relationship status. So my thing was more so like, yeah, I have room to grow, probably off likely in certain areas, as we all do. That's my point, that because you're single or you've been divorced 5 times, it doesn't mean you're more broken than the next person, or this irrevocably unique brokenness as compared to all of us who are out here just trying to figure it out and figure ourselves out and become the best versions of ourselves. And that's kind of what I was saying, was that if you are single and you, like you said, the 5 times divorce is a great example too, there's like this negative cloud being hung over you, like, oh, something's wrong with that one. As
Yeah.
if, like I said, you're just uniquely broken. And that was the main point I was trying to dispute. Like, I'm all these other things in addition to being single, and you're narrowing me down to this one aspect of my being.
Yeah. I love that. You're not going to allow other people to define you in any way. You are defining your own path. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate you for that and honor you. I want to acknowledge that that's the work that you're doing, because you are being your own hero, which is so beautiful. I love that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hmm. And we always ask our guests here on the show, because we are so focused on resources. You named a good book. I'm going to link that in the show notes below for the book. What would be one or two other resources that were really powerful in your healing journey?
I learned to meditate. That was extremely transformative for me. I started studying transcendental meditation 8 years ago. It's been a while. It feels like a very long time, 7 or 8 years ago, and it's been transformative. And I never thought something like that could have the effect that it has had, because it's like, what is this? This isn't telling me what to do. This isn't telling me how to get over anything or get past anything. So how can it work? But it has been transformative. Probably the single most transformative thing I've done just overall in my life. So transcendental meditation is a big one. Like I said, the book, The Emotionally Absent Mother, was a huge one. And then another book, The Four Agreements, was really
Ah,
transformative to me.
a great book.
Yeah,
Great book.
yeah. Yeah,
Excellent.
I'm a huge reader, and for years, all I did was read like self-help and philosophy and, spiritual healing books and things along those lines. So I have a plethora of books, but those are probably my top two. And then the meditation were really the three things I would say the trifecta of really what helped me to turn myself around and start to grow into a more full person.
I love that. I'm so glad that you are continuing to grow into that fullness and that authenticity. And we honor your work. Acamea, where can people find you? Where can they find your book? I'm going to have that all linked up in the show notes below.
You can find my book anywhere books are sold. It's called Daddy's Little Stranger. You can order it from Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Target, whatever your choice is. Bookshop, if you don't like to support the giants of publishing and retail. Bookshop.org. Anywhere you can order books, it's available to order. You can find me on Instagram at Acamea, and my website is acameadeadwiler.com.
Love it. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for sharing your story, keeping an amazing shining light.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Thank you for listening to or watching this episode of the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and follow. For any information that was discussed in this podcast episode, check out the show notes below. Until next time, be well.